Hey guys, welcome to Unit 9. In my opinion, this is the most important unit of this module. You can be great at writing training programs and you can understand all the science and physiology that you want. But if you and your lifters don't know how to execute the lifts, then you're not in a good position. We talked about putting your lifters in a position to succeed. This is the #1 way that you can do that. Make sure they understand the rules on the lifts and the execution of the lifts. Make no mistake about it. The squat, the bench press, and the deadlift are skills. Think of any sport you've ever played. If a coach had you change one thing on your skill, it might not have felt better right away, but as you stuck with it, it made a huge difference over time. Even if you're competent in performing these lifts, I think we can change some things today that will help you out in the long term. So what are we going to cover? First, I want to cover the overall execution of the squat. Then I want to cover the overall walkout and setup. That's probably the most overlooked portion of the squat. We'll cover hand position and bar position on the back. We'll cover stance width, we'll execute a full squat, and then at the end of looking at the back squat, I want to talk about some troubleshooting, meaning we're going to go over some basic stance positions, but if you have a heavier lifter or a lifter with different limb lengths, you might have to alter that a little bit. So we'll go through all of those things and we'll get to go at it with the execution before we do the bench press and the deadlift later on. So the first thing that I want to do now is take a look from the side view. If we're looking from the side view, we're going to talk about a little bit later in Unit 10 how the hip crease needs to be below the top of the knee. That is going to look like this. So we can see the hip crease is below the top of the knee, and I'm in a pretty good position. That's a good squat. If your hip crease isn't below the top of the knee, you're going to receive red lights. Probably 2 red lights from the side referees, and then from the chief referee, maybe a white, because he or she is not supposed to judge depth. Now, that we know that, let's take a look a little bit more about execution. The first thing that I would ask, if you're following along, is how would you begin the movement? What would your execution be if you were to describe this to somebody? What muscles would you engage at the start? Meaning, would you break at the knees or would you break at the hips? Let's first do a squat when we break at the knees. I'm going to accentuate what goes wrong, but let's take a look. So again, breaking at the knees. You're going to want to look at this from both the side and the front views. Well, when I break at the knees, again, I've accentuated what's wrong. As you can see, my heels are far off the ground. Now, what this also does, it throws off this angle of my hip crease to the top of the knee, whereas my squat's very borderline. Rather, if I'm back on my heels, I'm now in a much better position. So when you break at the knees, what happens? Well, you're going to come forward a little bit. Also, your foot or your heel is going to come off the ground, meaning you're going to lose a lot of the power that you derive from having your foot flat and having really back here where you're generating the power in the squat. Now, what happens when you break at the hips? A lot of people will understand what happens when they break at the knees, so they'll say, sit back as far as you can. Let's do that now, but let's also accentuate what goes wrong. Well, in this case, you can see a lot of torso flexion, right? I've pushed back too much at the hips and too much at the glutes. I'm now falling forward. My heels are flatter, but this also throws off this angle. My squat is now high. Obviously, I'm not in a good position to recover. One thing we're going to talk about today is moment arms. Moment arms are looking at the distance of the bar to your knee and the bar to your hip. When I break at the hips or I push back too much, again, watch what happens to my torso. Well, now I'm coming back too far. Look at the distance from the bar to my hip. I know it's not that much in me because my femurs are 2 centimeters long. But in a normal sized person, when they would stand up, they'd now have to really push their hips back through the movement and actively bring themselves back and engage more muscles that they wouldn't have to otherwise. So they're putting themselves in a terrible position to finish that lift. Rather, we would want to break simultaneously at the knees and the hips. This is going to be more like, let's say you have a stool right behind you or in between your legs and you're trying to sit down on that stool. Should always be able to read the writing on my shirt if I have short femur lengths, which I do. So I have my stance, and we'll talk about stance width again in a moment. Now, I'm going to break simultaneously at the knees and the hips. So it's not like this, and it's not like that. Rather, see, I'm much more upright. I'm in a good position. My weight is distributed where it should be, and my hip crease is far below the top of the knee. Now I can come back up in almost a perfectly straight line. And then I can push my hips through the movement. That's the appropriate execution of the squat. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit more when we do the full version. Now, let's talk about the setup and the walkout. This is something that is probably the most overlooked thing in any of the big 3 lifts. Most people, when you go to a commercial gym, their walkout will look something like this. Actually, first of all, their walkout would look something like this. Oh! Let's go! Now, before you've done that, right, everybody in the gym is already looking around saying, I really hope this guy leaves now. because I'm embarrassed to be in the same gym with him. But usually there's a high correlation, right? You remember we talked about R and R squared values in some of our units, there's statistics. There's a high correlation between people that do that and have a walkout that looks like this. Right? Now, before I even did the movement there, you're on your phone and you're looking to call a hospital because something bad is about to happen. Now, we exaggerated that, of course, but the main point is that's not an effective walkout. What wasn't effective about that? Well, the person wasn't prepared, they didn't have a plan, and if we do a walkout like that, where we're a little bit overly jacked up, right, we're gonna stagger our feet. And remember, when you walk out, you wanna be in the same exact position each and every time. Why? These lifts are skills. Rather, we're gonna have a very specific walkout. I'm first going to do it without any instruction. And what you should be able to notice is that I had a specific plan. It was time consuming, but it put me in a specific place that I can replicate each and every time. And that skill that you worked on in your sport where your coach changed something, you wanted to replicate that the same each and every time. Here's the walkout. Now you'll notice that took a considerable amount of time, but in the meet, once the bar is loaded, you have 1 full minute. So we're still well under that minute. That's another reason why once they call you to the platform, I would get up there quickly. You don't have to rush, you can take your time, and you have 1 minute until you get the actual start command. So in this case, even if you don't know exactly what we did, you can tell that I clearly had a plan. That's something that I do every time I squat, whether it's with an empty barbell or whether it's with a max lift, every single time. So let's talk about what we did. Well, the first thing, without the barbell, is we took 3 steps. Why 3 steps? We want to take the least amount of steps that we can, right, to conserve energy, but enough steps that we don't clip the rack when walking out, which we'll demonstrate in just a moment. So, in this case, when we take 3 steps, what do? We get our bar position, again, which we'll talk about. Then the first thing is we stand straight up. When we stand straight up, we don't immediately start walking the bar back. You can get away with that on a light load, but on a heavy load, you're going to be in trouble. Big breath, stand straight up, and then let the bar settle on your back. Your first step, doesn't matter which foot you use, should come straight back behind you. Your second step should set. Your third step should set. Adjust your toes if needed to become as symmetrical as possible. Let the bar settle, take your breath, and then squat. It's a 3-step walkout. Now why don't we take 2? That's less steps than 3. At least I know that much math. So if we do that, we can see, hey, we're going to take a 2-step walkout. I'm getting the bar set. I'm creating a shelf, which we'll talk about. Big breath, stand straight up. Now I want to take 2 steps. I'm going to step with my left foot back first. But if I step with my only 2 steps, remember in a 3-step walkout, the first step comes straight behind me, and I'm already outside of the rack. If I step with 2 steps, take a look now, right, at the right side of the bar here. Well, it's coming in to hit the rack. If that barbell hits the rack, I'm in trouble. It's going to throw me out of position. Now I have to twist and torque myself to get my second step in position. And it's going to take more work to get the feet symmetrical. So that's going to put us in a negative position and actually cause more energy than just simply doing a 3-step walkout. So that 3-step walkout is what we're looking for. Why? The first step removes you from the rack. I know this might sound trivial at first. However, you can add weight to your squat immediately upon performing this. You'll feel much more comfortable, and more specifically, if you have a lot of sets, you'll be able to replicate as much as possible that same position every single time. Now, let's start to talk about bar position, hand position, and then foot placement before we go through a full squatting and troubleshooting. So when we talk about bar placement, well, there's really kind of 3 bar positions. There's a high bar, a low bar, and really kind of an intermediate or moderate type of low bar, modified low bar, if you will. I'm typically going with that modified low bar. I think that's going to be comfortable for a lot of people. But as we'll talk about, this can depend upon your leverages as well. But if you're not doing a high bar squat, and the high bar squat is probably the least common in powerlifting, it doesn't mean there aren't very, very good high bar squatters. But if you're not doing a high bar squat, you're going to need to bring the bar down below what the comfortable high bar squat position is. So to do that, it's going to be painful if you just try to place the bar lower. You actually need to create a shelf for that bar to sit just right around or just below your rear delts. So to be able to do that, you actually need to pinch your shoulder blades to create that shelf. If you have your arms wide, you're not going to be able to retract as much, right? So if you're doing the walkout where the guy ran up to the bar like a crazy person, oftentimes you'll see these people having their hands on the outside of the bar. If you do this, not only is this very unstable and also illegal in powerlifting, but you can't really pinch your shoulder blades to create that shelf. So we're going to advise a relatively close hand position. The closer your hands, the better you can retract to create that shelf. However, it can be painful to go in too close. So as much as you can without causing any pain, depending on your shoulder and your elbow mobility. So if we take this, I'm going to grip it about here. For me, I like to replicate this. Everything I do, I try to replicate so it's the same each time. So I can take my thumb and I can put where the knurling starts, right on where my fingernail ends from my thumb, and then I have my thumb around the bar. It's a pretty close hand position. That's about how I can go without causing much pain. Now I use the bar as a torque or a lever, right, to get underneath it. Right, it's going to take some time, but okay, I have it. I have my feet now, and before I interact the bar, my feet are going to be where the bar splits the middle of my foot. If my feet are out here, I'm going to have to come like that off the rack. If my feet are over here, I'm going to have to good morning it off the rack. So I'm going to get my feet so the bar splits the middle of my foot. Now, you'll see me get the bar into position. I'm going to do retraction. Take a look. I find that shelf. Big breath. Pop the bar up. Let it settle. 1, 2, 3. Let the bar settle. Breathe. Squat. It's a personal record for me. Good squat. So that's taking a look at everything. In high bar squat, that position is much more comfortable. You don't quite have to create that shelf. If you look at this, you can see the bar is in a distinctly different position. And we'll give you a view of this from the back in just a little bit so you can see the difference between high bar and low bar. But in this case, you can probably see this difference. Now, a low bar squat is typically going to be stronger than a high bar squat. The reason being the load is transferred more to the posterior chain. So let's take a look at a high bar squat, which will be pretty weird because I haven't done one in a while. So if we do this, I'm fairly upright when I squat, but you'll notice I should be even more upright on a high bar squat. Now on a low bar squat, you'll see a little bit more torso flexion. So let's get in position, retract. How many steps? 1, 2, 3. Now I'm still upright enough, but you'll see more torso flexion. Take a look. And compare that to the high bar squat, I think it's pretty clear that there's more torso flexion. But the load is transferred more to the posterior chain on the low bar squat, which is likely accounting for the better increases in strength. However, let's say you have somebody that has very, very long femurs. Well, on a low bar squat, those moment arms that we talked about are going to be very long. Because they're very long, they're going to cause you to have a huge lean forward. Now, some people have a greater lean forward than others due to their longer femur lengths. However, it always doesn't mean it's a safe position if your femurs are so long and you're having trouble getting into that position. So their more modified low bar or high bar might work just a little bit better. But you have to see, depending upon your lifter and their leverages, how it works out. So try things out and see what they're comfortable with. What's important is that you know the overall execution. Then you can take a look at high bar and a look at low bar in the specific lifters and go from there. Now, there are a few other things to discuss. I'd like to discuss stance width for a moment. You can see my stance is a fairly close, or what I would like to say, a fairly normal stance. It's right about hip width or so. This is probably home base for most people. However, it doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. If somebody is training with me, right, and I'm 4'7", right, so if another individual is going to be in the height of a normal human of around, let's say, 5'10", they might have around a stance for themselves that's similar to mine, but respectively, it's a little bit wider on an absolute scale because they're taller. Also, we have somebody with longer limb lengths. Well, if we have somebody with longer limb lengths and they have a closer stance, remember the torso folding or torso flexion? They're going to have a lot of that. So in this case, they would probably have a wider stance. That's going to allow them to stay. Even in me, you'll notice it. I'll stay much more upright. You can see the difference from here as opposed to here. I'm going to be much more upright. So take a look at your lifter, learn their leverages, and then adjust accordingly. It's about fitting the individual, not a one-size-fits-all, especially for technique, biomechanics, and leverages that they might have. Another thing to discuss is, what if somebody has trouble getting depth? Well, we just kind of saw I can stay more upright when I'm in a wider position. The same thing is going to happen in terms of depth when we have our toes pointed out. So home base, again, is usually about 11 and 1 on a clock. Well, somebody's at 11 and 1 on a clock, and they do depth. I'll cut the squat just a little short. I feel terrible about myself already cutting it here. But if somebody does that and they can't get lower, take a look at my toes. I'm going to point them out to 10 and 2. Immediately, my depth is better. They're just opening their groin. Right? It's a very easy way to achieve more depth. Somebody can also do that with a wider stance at first if they're not comfortable. They have a lot of torso flexion. Very easy. Over time, your goal might be to bring that in. The reason in a lifter that's a shorter lifter, you wouldn't want a super wide stance if they can maintain a closer stance, is because that places the stress on the hips, and that's going to decrease speed out of the bottom of the lift a lot. With a closer stance, you're going to have more speed. However, if your stance is too close, you might feel like a monster when you're warming up, but it's going to be more difficult to finish the lift. So you have to find that middle ground for everybody. Now, before we actually do some commands and talk about a few other things with execution on game day, I want to talk about breathing. A lot of times people will hear to take a breath and breathe, but you'll see this. And they'll expand their chest and they'll take a big breath here. Well, if you can look at my upper back, what happens? The bar is going to move, right? You don't want 200, 225 kilos moving around on your back when you're working up to a max lift. That's not going to go well. It might even throw the bar outside of that shelf and it's wasting energy. Rather, you want to breathe into your gut. So when I'm breathing and I'm pushing out, so if you have a weight belt on, pushing out against that, you're not even going to really see too much except maybe my gut expand just a little bit. It's very minimal, right? You can't see that too much. Now let's unrack the bar, talk through the walkout, get in position, we'll go through our routine, and then we'll talk about breathing and then how to tighten before you execute the squat, and we'll finish up. So everything, let's put it together. Remember, I'm going to have a modified low bar position. So to do that, what am I going to need to do? Right, have the bar in my real delts, so I mean a closer grip to cause that retraction. So I get set up. I'm going to place my feet here, use this bar as a lever or torque to continue to get underneath it. All right, I've achieved that. Make sure the bar splits the middle of my foot. Now once I'm here, I go ahead and retract. Bar's in the shelf. Now I take a big breath, push my hips through to pop the bar off the rack. Stand straight up, let the bar settle, don't walk back yet. From there, take your first step, which is straight back, the goal being to remove you from the rack. Take your second step and set that foot. Take your third step and set that foot. Adjust your toes slightly if needed, without worrying, because you know you're never going to get perfectly symmetrical, but do the best you can. From here, let the bar settle again. Take a breath where you're pushing out against your belt into your gut so it's barely noticeable. As you do that, you're going to tighten every muscle in your body. I'm going to try to pull the bar down or break the bar across my back. Right? I can't quite do that, right? At least I'm not strong enough yet, but I hope to be one day. So if I do that, you're also going to notice that my elbows are pointed down. Big breath. Breaking simultaneously at the hips and the knees. One more time. Big breath. And if you notice how we did that, right? We did those 2 reps without blending them. Often you'll see this if somebody's doing a set of high reps. Well, the issue when you do that, while it might work to get reps quickly, the problem is that you're rushing it, you could increase your risk of injury, but you're not getting a chance to truly breathe and put yourself in the same position every time. Rather, if you do a set of 3, I would rather that set of 3 look like this. I hope you can see now that performing the squat is a skill. It's not just a lift, and even if your main interest is muscle growth, you still want to utilize this skill. If you get better at the skill, you'll be able to lift more weight and you'll be able to overload more. Let's one more time recap. Then we're going to finish up the very final thing was showing you the commands of the squat. So just to recap very briefly, when you execute the squat, you don't break at the knees or the hips individually. You break at them simultaneously, stay upright, and drive your hips through the movement. After that, when we go to the walkout, it's going to take 3 steps. The reason it takes 3 steps is that if you take 2 steps, you could clip the rack. Remember to let the bar settle when you unrack it, and then again before you execute the squat. For a lower bar squat position, you're going to need to have the bar under your rear delts. You're going to retract with a closer hand position as long as that's keeping your elbows healthy to be able to create that shelf. That's going to transfer the load to the posterior chain, keep you a little bit stronger. But remember, if you have really long moment arms due to really long femurs, you might want to consider a higher bar position. If you have trouble hitting depth, a little wider stance or opening your groin. But again, if you don't, that will decrease the speed out of the bottom of the lift. Finally, when you're able to set up and once you're in this position, tightening, taking that big breath into your gut, not into your chest, pulling the bar down across your back and being able to execute the lift and treating each repetition individually so it's independent of the previous. Now, the last thing we're going to do is the commands. In Unit 10, we'll talk about this a little bit. So in a moment, I'm going to get a squat command from world-famous online bodybuilding coach, Dr. Eric Helms. Dr. Helms is going to give me 2 commands, a squat, and he's going to... Guys, I'd like to take this moment to apologize on behalf of the SBS Academy for anything that Eric does. We can't control him. It's been a hardship for all of us, but we're trying to work through it. Hopefully we can improve this for you. So, he's going to give me 2 commands. There are 2 commands in the squat. They're going to be squat and rack. So once the bar is loaded, I will have 1 minute to do that. And the 1 minute starts from the time the announcer or the referee says bar is loaded until the time that I actually receive the squat command. So Eric, please let me know when the bar is loaded.
Bar is loaded. Squat. Rack.
And those are your commands. We'll see you in just a minute for the bench press.